please do so on our YouTube channel, which is Potentialization YouTube channel, and please subscribe to the channel as well, so you get to see up and coming episodes as they're recorded, and you can go back and watch them whenever you want. So just to remind you, this session is being recorded, as just kind of mentioned, so it will be available afterwards. And this week we've got a great talk which is called "You Are Under No Obligation to Be the Same Person You Were 5 minutes ago." So maybe we're all going to transform in this, and it's by Dr. Darren Stevens. So welcome, Darren.
Good evening. How is everyone?
All good?
Good.
Brilliant, brilliant. So yeah, this is kind of your constructed development theory that you did as a subject of your PhD, which is amazing. Could you just explain for everybody a little bit about this constructed development theory, just kind of in a nutshell, a bit of an overview?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I'm not really good at nutshells, but in a nutshell, it's we use shortcuts in our thinking. And really what's key to understanding how we construct ourselves and construct our thinking is how aware we are of those shortcuts. And what I did was constructed development theory kind of emerged out of, I was working with some master's level students down in London, in a university down in London, because I lecture at university, and I was working with some students, and I noticed that I was working with a guy called Otto Laskin and another one called Robert Keegan on their levels of development. And I noticed that if you look at Keegan's stages, stage 2, 3, 4, 5, I noticed that the profile system I was using, which deconstructed our thinking down into these 50 cognitive intentions, I noticed that maybe you could map those different 50 cognitive intentions into, for example, Keegan's stages of development. To cut a long story short, you can. And you can also determine whether someone is like socialized mind, which is Keegan's stage 3, or whether they're more self-authoring, which is Keegan's stage 4. And I did the entire PhD mapping how we think to Keegan's and Lasky's systems. Keegan talks about social emotional complexity, and Lasky kind of said, well, you can't have that without looking at cognitive complexity. So he kind of looked at both, but he separated them out. And in my theory, I actually put them back together and say, well, if internal is a cognitive approach, but external, meaning external to everybody else, is a more emotional approach, when you realize that they actually work in opposition to each other, you need both to be balanced in your thinking. And the whole point of constructive development theory is to strive for balance in these cognitive heuristics, in these cognitive intentions, these shortcuts, so that you can actually choose how you respond in the moment. And that's it, really.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely fascinating, because I know me, certainly it all depends on the situation, but sometimes just do things on autopilot. But it's kind of like almost training the mind, and the more knowledge and understanding you've got of it, then the more informed decisions you can make, and I guess the more you can train your mind and stuff.
Yes.
You kind of mentioned about shortcuts. What do you mean when you say that people use shortcuts?
Well, there was. If any of you are familiar with NLP, and Jung, as Julie said earlier, but if any of you are familiar with NLP, there was something called neuro-linguistic programming. There was something called meta-programs. And when you actually look at what meta-programs are, you have things like internal, external, towards, away from. And I looked at those, and that's what the identity compass deconstructs your thinking in. So it determines how internal your thinking is. How do you know your own mind? Do you look to yourself for your rules, or do you look to organizations or other people for your rules? So that's an external locus of evaluation. Okay, and these things pop up in therapy and things like this, but I'm not a therapist. I've got a PhD in psychology, but I'm not a therapist. I have worked with a bunch of therapists and people with therapy, and there's a massive overlap. But the shortcuts are, if, for example, students go into university and they're very external. They want the lecturer to give them all the information, tell them what to do and how to do it, and hold their hand. And when you point this out to them, that the pattern that they use the most, the shortcut in their thinking that they use, is an external locus of evaluation. And if you just do this, which is internal, it changes not only the internal-external balance, but also their construction of self, their worldview, how they work, how they interact with people for the rest of, you know, their university career. So those shortcuts are, and we all do it. So, you know, if you don't like to take risks, that's called away from. If you are gung-ho and don't care about risks, that's called towards, where you see the polar opposites. So we can measure how towards and away from you are. And the point is about the theory that towards and that away from is pretty much the same as that, because you're still limited in how you respond. If you only do one of the two, then think about this, right? If you're massively gung-ho, your responses are limited to never ever thinking about the problems. Okay, you don't actually assess the risk, you just go for it. Other way around, you always think about the risks and you never go for it. You're just as limited, just in the opposite direction. So what we try to do is expose the difference, and it's that difference that becomes the intention, which creates the choice. So the closer you can get these two things together, the greater your choice to respond in the moment. And what I did was, from a constructive development theory perspective, I created the 4 pillars: intention, awareness, choice, and response. Phil, I'm going to also say you must jump in because I can talk forever.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, these 4 pillars, because it's kind of like what you're saying is, you know, an external view. And I could imagine, like, almost similar to what I was saying last week, really. When you're younger, you do absorb much, and perhaps you look more to the outside world, or certainly the path that I went on for what should happen, and potentially even more like external validation. And that's, you know, if you're fitting in with what other people are doing. But then equally, as much as we're all physically unique, we're all mentally unique. So it's knowing about internally what resonates with you authentically from a mental perspective, and it's sort of having the two in balance is what you're saying. So yeah, please do carry on about the 4 pillars.
So you mentioned earlier about environment. Now we all know the English phrase is you wear a different hat. So if you're at work, you wear a different hat when you're in the pub to when you're on the golf course. I assume everybody here plays golf, yeah? And basically, basically what I'm saying is that's actually a different construction of your thinking. And I gave a talk on Saturday, and I had a guy who'd done a profile in German and a profile in Spanish, and he considered himself to be bicultural, I suppose the word is, bicultural. He also spoke great English. It's only us English who don't speak any other language, really. And we deconstructed his thinking using these 50 cognitive intentions in German and in Spanish. And he had a different construction of self in each culture. So when we ask, you know, how much does your culture impact your thinking? The answer is quite a lot. The actual question is, are you aware of it, and can you ignore it so that your culture doesn't impact how you construct yourself in the moment? Most people say no, they can't ignore their culture. It's embedded in it. I mean, I don't know what the English culture is, really. Jason can help here. What is the English culture? No, don't worry. We talked about it before. But the point is, are you aware of your intention in the moment to the point where your culture doesn't impact you? And it's very difficult to step out of your culture. When you look at it from a German perspective, I have a scale called I call it the awareness quotient. The awareness quotient is really about how self-aware you are. And an interesting facet about that, I did call it the thinking quotient in my thesis, but in Germany, they don't like thinking quotient because that implies the levels and I'm better than you. And they're not really keen on I'm better than you kind of phrases. So they changed it and said, make it the awareness quotient, because now it's about self-awareness, and the direction of intention, Phil, changes. It goes back here. So my level of self-awareness has no bearing on you. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that's what they like about it. So in German, this person's profile was marginally higher on my awareness quotient than he was in Spanish, in the Spanish profile. Why? Because the construction of his German character, personality, I don't care what you call it, had different ways of being, had different actions, had different ways of thinking and acting in Germany than he would if he were in Spain. You can imagine the Spanish now, if we're all going to stereotype, that he's going to be much more relaxed in Spanish. And, you know, fiestas and siestas and things like this, whereas in Germany, he's going to be much more procedural and that kind of thing. But I'm taking the mick, but that is the cultural generalization. The question is, sorry, Phil.
No, that's cool. I was just saying, again, it's external environment and to what level it it impacts you. And sometimes you do it subconsciously as well. So you might not even be aware that you're doing it. You just fall into it potentially.
That is actually the basis of the theory. At what point, the higher up the awareness quotient scale you go, you recognize that everything is a construct, which is why I say you're under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. Because if you want to change how you construct yourself now, you can. We're pretty lazy. Psychologists in the room will tell you we're quite lazy in the sense that my personality needs to have some form of stability. Otherwise I might get, I don't know what the words are. I don't want to say things like multiple personalities, but the point is we need to have some form of stability so that we can be the same person we were yesterday for our own mental health. However, that's not going to be an issue if you already know that in a different context, you have a different hat on anyway.
Mm.
You know, and a lady on LinkedIn once said to me that if you construct yourself differently in each context, then you're fake. That's not your authentic self. I'm being authentic. I'm the same in every context. What I said to her was rather much more nicely than I'm saying it here. You're a low level person. You're not very high on my AQ. The reason for that is because if you think that you're the same person in every context, what are you not seeing that's just as important? You're not seeing the context. Okay, so what I said to her was that you can construct yourself differently in each context. And in that case, it's the constructor that's the authentic person. Now, in my book, I say there is no such thing as authentic person, but we can have that argument another time. But if you want to, the authentic one is the one doing the constructing, not the constructed one. Mm. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's kind of, or would an analogy kind of be, you know how they say, treat people how you'd expect to be treated yourself, but actually potentially it could be treat people how you think they'd like to be treated. So you're looking at the environment and all of that. So you're aware of knowledge and understanding of where you are and how things are.
Yeah, you are. I mean, to be honest with you, one of the other things that comes out of this research is that how you construct me isn't really an issue for me, because if you're thinking about this from a coaching perspective, somebody who's at AQ 5 on my scale cannot coach a person at AQ 9, and it creates a much more ethical framework for things like coaching and developing, because this person cannot see your patterns. They can't see how you construct your thinking. They might be, internal, external, whereas you might be balanced on internal, external, where they can't see your balance. They can't see the fact that you've got a much wider, broader perspective on just those two things, internal, external. So in that sense, how people construct you is always going to be wrong. And that in and of itself is an appeaser for mental health issues, in the sense that once you explain to someone that person's constructing you using their lens and their limited perspective, their limited potential, their limited, you no longer need to worry about how they construct you. Yeah. That makes sense.
It does. It's interesting actually, because but could it be if they're at completely different opposite ends, then that could be sort of like when people are talking and it's almost like sometimes you're banging your head against a brick wall, and it's like you're almost like, although you're talking the same language, you're talking it in two different ways and stuff.
I can give you an example of that, Phil. Yeah, a friend of mine is a clinical psychologist, and she's a smart cookie. She's a sharp cookie, and she was with a guy, and they got divorced. And she said to him, "Look, I just want to understand what led you to say the thing you said that wasn't quite as how it turned out." And he said, "Are you calling me a liar?" She said, no, I just want to understand the process you went through. He said, "You're calling me a liar." No, he said, "You're either calling me a liar or you're not." Black and white thinking, right? He couldn't see the shades of grey between liar and not liar. Whereas she could.
Yeah.
When you're banging your head against the wall, generally, and this is not just me saying this, Bertrand Russell said this, 70 years ago, it's because they don't see the shades of grey that you see. And in my language, they don't see the construction you see.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Thank you. Did we cover the pillars actually? We were going to talk about
Oh no, sorry. Yeah. The pillars are.
Yeah. That's
the
cool.
Pillars are intention, awareness, choice, and response. So if you think about your risk aversion, you're towards and away from it. What's your intention? Your intention is to not have an accident, for example. That's your intention. How aware are you of that intention in the moment? Is it unconscious or is it a conscious, awareness? If you're aware of it, what choices does that awareness create? And if you're not aware of it, what choices does it not create? And based on those choices, you're going to respond in either an habituated way or in a much more at choice way. So for me, the whole point is to uncover those habituated responses that then become choice. Intention, what's the intention? What are you aware of that intention? What choices does that awareness create? And can you respond differently in the moment? Now, for everybody here, if you want to test it, just talk to someone. On purpose, piss them off, and on purpose, get them back on side. See if you can, because it's really cool.
Interesting. Might give that one a try later. Cool. So,
Chris is good already, is he saying?
That's good. So that sounds fascinating, this system that you've done there. And so, but how is your system like kind of at a different stage of development, I guess, than others? I think you mentioned, was it Keegan and some others? So how does it differ from those?
Keegan and Lasky, Keegan talks about social emotional. And if you look at it, now, I don't know if anybody here is American, but I'm not. He used Americans in his study, and he used pretty much students. So what he calls his stage 4, I think, is much, much lower if we use a European standard. I'm being mean, but you know what I mean. Lasky is phenomenally academic, and he uses philosophy and whatnot to get his point across. They each use stages 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's no different to Jane Lervinger, Michael Commons, Bachet's, all these other names that you can reel off, Kurt Greuter, blah, blah, blah. They all use stages. What they're not very good at is telling you what changes. In order to get me from level 3 to level 4, specifically, what do I have to change in my thinking that is going to guarantee me vertical development? Okay, so I teach at university. That's horizontal development. The kids are downloading information, remembering it potentially, and regurgitating it in an exam, eventually when we get back to normality. That's horizontal development. Vertical development is where you can now make qualitatively better decisions because you see much more. You pull in a lot more facets of your thinking. And I called this, where you're pulling in all these different things, I call that your dynamic intelligence. So the more dynamically intelligent you are, the more capable you are of making a qualitatively better decision. And when you look at that from a business perspective, an organization perspective, you want the people at the top to be making 20-year decisions. Elliot Jacques called that span of discretion. But now we know how they can make 20-year decisions based on their thinking style. So what tends to happen is you get somebody who's here at this level of their thinking, but the role they're in is at this level of complexity. And you often find the Peter principle, where people are promoted beyond their competency.
Yeah.
Right. But what tends to happen is, if their complexity is here, if their level of things is here, but the role is here, they burn out and they leave. Okay. They literally burn out. They can't cope in the environment. Other way around, where their complexity is too high, but the role is just dull, they get bored. They bore out, according to a guy called Csikszentmihalyi. They bore out and they leave. Now I can map the way they think, the construction of their thinking, the level of their complexity, based on the 50 cognitive intentions and how aware they are of them, which removes it from the stages. But also what it does is, from a stage transition perspective, I can tell you what to tweak in your thinking. For example, internal, external, own, partner, observer, whatever. I've got a list of them up there.
Yeah.
So that we can strive for balance, and the more balanced you are, the more capable you are of making a more balanced decision, a qualitatively better decision. Keegans and Laskys and Lervingers and Cook-Groshers, they don't tell you what to change. They just say, this is what it looks like here, and this is what it looks like when you get here. But the bit in the middle is like, and then the miracle happens, and then you're here. Yeah. But they don't tell you this bit. Right. And mine does. And I boast about that quite a lot in my thesis, because they just don't talk about it.
No, but it's absolutely essential, because, everybody needs a map, even if it's like a mental model or whatever, to be able to get from A to B. You can't just teleport there or whatever, or have some magic happening and stuff. So it sounds brilliant. And it also sounds kind of, I guess, very relevant for potentialization. So, because that's all about empowering people with potential, etc. So from that kind of perspective with potentialization, how would you say kind of like future clients would benefit from this approach? That you know, and perhaps like, I mean, I know you've touched on it about how some of the others won't help as much, but from a potentialization perspective.
From a potentialization perspective, it is about future capacity and capability. The more capable you are, I mean, imagine, we all know somebody who acts and reacts habitually, and they act angrily, for example, and they can't help themselves. They don't, you know, why am I doing this? They don't even probably ask why they're doing it. If you can show them how to stop and catch themselves in the moment, and they recognize which pattern, which cognitive intention they're using, you offer them the opposite pattern, you offer them a plethora of different interventions. Their level of self-awareness goes like this. And now you can do it in about 5 minutes, but they don't live there. They just visit it,
yeah,
and then come back down. So in order to live there, they're going to need a process to get through it. Now, I'm not good at process. I'm not good at detail and things like this, right? However, I have created a framework that will allow them to understand where they are right now and how to get to the next level. And as we just said, I will tell them and show them what they might need to do that. Okay, so if you think about it from a potentialization, they are working on their future potential by uncovering their habituated patterns in their thinking, which become their habituated patterns in their behaving.
Yeah, and I guess isn't there that thing where it's like, is it kind of, you almost got to be consciously aware that it's happening first, because sometimes if it's like you're unconsciously aware that something doesn't exist, but then you have to start to become consciously aware that it exists, so it's something that you can address, but then you've got to work at it in order to enable it to be a habit, or perhaps something like that. You know, it takes time and stuff.
It does. At my age, it'll take a bit longer than it would a student. You know, it might take me 3 months to get it right, you know, to seek that balance. But a student might be able to do it in like 3 weeks, because they're just much younger. I know we've got plasticity in our brains, but, you know, I'm getting on a bit now.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine. So, so that's cool. That's very interesting. So you say that like the awareness that you're just talking about, that's what creates choice. So I guess that's key to basically what we're doing here. So how will it increase a person's self-awareness? And what do you see as the ultimate goal of this?
The ultimate goal is what I've called my awareness quotient, AQ10.
Right.
And I've got it over here on this thing. It says the recognition that everything is constructed from self to culture to politics, and one is capable of seeing the construction and the pattern within the system and beyond the system. When you put anything into a system, and that includes academia, that includes your work environment, you limit whatever, you know, you limit the children, you limit anybody that goes into a system. The system is a limitation. But when you recognize that it's a construct, and you can choose to construct it differently. Now, you said just now that we all have a map. Well, a guy, the map is not the territory. Who was that? Korzybski, didn't he? Korzybski said that. The map is not the territory. What he meant was your map isn't my map. But what he never looked at was how we construct the map and what we use to construct our individual maps. But if you go one step further, which Korzybski didn't do, and you look at the map is just a representation of the terrain. Well, you can also construct the terrain. And once you get, no one ever gets to AQ10. It's like Maslow's self-actualization. It's not a destination, it's just a journey. But if you think about your level of self-awareness from an ultimate position, it pulls you towards the ultimate position to say everything is a construct, because all of a sudden you're no longer worried about what the other person thinks, because that other person is constructing you. You know, and you know it's not right. And in Buddhism, there's a phrase that says, this too shall soon pass. So when you realize that everything is temporary, including the good times, not just the bad times, including me and you and the good times, this too shall soon pass. Everything is a construct and everything is temporary. You start to develop a different way of being in the world. And I even get my kids to do this. And my boy's 13 and he's starting to construct his thinking in a really good way. He did his assignment, an English essay based on my theory. Obviously, I now love him more than my other child. And he said, "Dad, do you mind if I change some of the words?" I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because if I use these words, they won't understand it." He says, "Although I know, Dad, that if I change the words, it will change the meaning." And at 13 years of age, he's got it. You know, that how we construct everything, the sentence creates the meaning, creates the meaning. And if we change the construction, we change the meaning.
Yeah, interesting. That's really interesting. So, what do you think about things like emotional intelligence then? How does that fit in with this? And what do you think about emotional intelligence as a concept for developing? Because that's something we've not really touched on so far.
I wrote down here earlier, one intelligence to rule them all. And I thought that was mine, dynamic intelligence. The point is, I was being flippant, but the point is, when you look at emotional intelligence and they talk about emotional regulation and regulating the emotions of others, you can't do that. Right? You just can't do that. You don't know what I'm thinking or feeling. Lisa Feldman Barrett has done about 20 years research on emotional construction and how we construct anger, happy, the same as we did yesterday. It doesn't mean it's true and it doesn't mean it's real, okay? Now, there's a lot of counter to this, and I suspect some people here might have a counter to it. But if you consider emotional intelligence from a position of intention, awareness, choice, and response, how much of your emotional reaction is simply a habit? And if you can tell me that you do neuroticism, show me how you do neuroticism, and I'll do it your way, then I'll be neurotic too. Ocean and things like this, trait theory, so openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, that kind of thing, right? And when you ask someone about, for example, how introverted they are, how extroverted they are, invariably they can't tell you if it's a choice. They can only tell you that the test said they did it. And they suffer from things like psychometric isomorphism, where when you tick the boxes as I like to go to parties, that becomes the reason you go to parties. And that's just not true. So when you say something like, today I feel blue, we don't really know what that means. Does it mean you're cold? Does it mean you're dating a Smurf? What does it mean, right? So from an emotional intelligence perspective, if you then interject my intention, awareness, choice, response, you get a completely different animal. So EI, according to my thesis, becomes a facet underneath dynamic intelligence once you recognize that you have a choice. Where emotionally, does that make sense?
Yeah, and because I've always kind of thought, I mean, sort of, or my understanding of what we're just saying is it's quite, that was an external element of emotional intelligence, but I've always thought like emotional intelligence as well is about understanding your own emotions and realizing when your own emotions come up and then potentially looking at how they're triggered and how you can control those.
Yeah, it is. And then you're looking at intention, awareness, choice, response again.
Yeah, so it's like that foundation piece, and then you look at those. Yeah,
and the framework of intention, awareness, choice, response is not just used here and not just used in things like emotional intelligence. It's also used, my friend uses it to teach his martial art, as do I. You can't really see it, but all my martial art stuff is over there. And I use my framework to teach that. And another guy I know uses it to fix his motorbike. I don't know how, but I've got also 3 therapists using intention, awareness, choice, response in conjunction with their therapy as a framework. And we're working on that. And that does incorporate the facets of emotional intelligence and CBT and other such therapies. Yeah. The other guy, my guy Adam, he's much better at mapping my stuff across to what he knows than I am. So.
Right. Oh, brilliant. And I've just got a couple of other questions. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to the floor and see if anybody's got any questions, if anything's coming in on the chat box. Like you've told us about how your theory is different. Can you basically tell us how it's the same as others? Because a lot of this kind of stuff it's got its differences and its similarities. So how does it kind of fit in with the others more?
I think when it strives for the highest level, which is why this is potentialization is really good for this, and this there's a nice symbiotic element here. Greuter, Lervinger, Jacques, Lasky, Keegan all have a top level, right? And that level is something that's only attainable by 1 or 2% of the population. However, it's a great pull, and in order to develop our thinking, in order to develop how aware we are of ourselves, to use my language, obviously, We look at the AQ9, we look at the AQ10, and we say, well, at the point of self-awareness, am I there yet? And that will be the same for Lasky. You know, am I his top level is about self-aware, you know, so, but also Ken Wilber, when you look at, I know John knows spiral dynamics and things like this. When you look at the top levels above tier 2 for Ken Wilber's stuff, it's that top level attainment that I think all of the profiles, all of the systems have in common that I think is really, really useful. The way I learned Keegan was I don't know how many years ago, but I looked at what it was to be level 4 on Keegan's scale up to 5, and I acted as if I was level 4 until I eventually got there with my thinking and with my behavior and that kind of thing. If it gives us a scale, if it gives us a goal to get to, all of the systems will have that top level, and I think that is potentialization right there.
Yeah, that's it. And all of this can feed into the technology platform that's currently being developed as well. So people can enter information and get knowledge and understanding about themselves, so they know how to use that information to improve themselves as well, basically. So that's cool. And so just kind of to sum up, really, I guess, what are the key value adds of this CDT to a client? What would you say on that, basically, the key essence?
I think the key essence of CDT is understanding how you construct you. First of all, it's knowing that you can construct you, because that's key. People at the lower levels don't know they can construct themselves. That's why they act and react habitually. But knowing that you can construct you is key. And then knowing how to construct you differently is going to be the next step. I end all my TikToks, because I am very young, I'm on TikTok, and I end all my TikToks with construct yourself differently. And it's just that recognition that you can. You don't need to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. You can construct yourself however you choose, with awareness. And it always takes somebody to point out those patterns, you know, like a coach, like a lecturer, teacher, whatever, somebody or a therapist or whatever, to point out those patterns. But I think that's the key, understanding that you can construct yourself differently, and then giving them the path to construct themselves differently.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I like the saying, sometimes you can't always see the picture when you're the one that's in the frame. So that's why I guess it might be good if there's somebody external. And
yes.
Also, I like the saying, sometimes it takes somebody else's faith in you before your own faith kicks in. So if you do know you want to go somewhere, perhaps having somebody external or a coach to help show you the way might also help as well. Because
as long as you remember that if the coach is here and the client is there, they'll never be able to coach you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And you can't read the label of the jar you're stuck in.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's the same principle as the frame, isn't it?
Cool. Yes, absolutely. Cool. Oh, well, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. So what we'll do now is we'll open it up to the floor to anybody that's got any questions. So thank you very much for that talk.
Bill, are you okay if I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I should say is actually it was probably something like 20 years ago or so that I was first introduced to stage development. And that was probably the start of the process of what's brought us here to potentialization, because it's that increase of awareness that really is exciting. So that's been a long, long process, but here we are currently building a system. But one thing I've often heard, and it seems to be fairly obviously true, is that our unconscious minds filter out lots of details all over the place. So we can actually react to those unconscious things when we need to. So like we'll cross the road, but when we get to the other side, we've no idea what was happening. It was, how do we choose what to be aware of? What's useful?
I use the example of a cat running out in front of a driver. You know, when you're driving down the road, you're doing the same journey every single day. And you kind of go into autopilot, don't you?
Yeah.
But if a cat jumps out in front of you, how do you know to slam on the brakes? Right? And I call it unconscious. I call it an unconscious awareness, because my son, when he was 12 years old, a little git, made a really good question about, Dad, you can't do that because, and I had to think about it for like 2 days. But actually, the person that's not capable of pressing the brake pedal is the one with a lower dynamic intelligence, because they don't potentially have the experience to draw on, or whatever the words are, to say, I need to slam the brakes on now. But the next time a cat jumps out on them, they probably have that stored away. The other thing is as well, there's a professor called Nick Chater at Warwick University, and he wrote a book called The Mind is Flat. Julie, you'll like this. And what he said was, there is no unconscious mind. Everything you do is a construct now in the moment. Everything you're thinking, you're not pulling it from an unconscious place. It's there. Now, I used his theory and Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on emotions as kind of support for my theory of how we construct everything. And I used the unconscious driver example to say, with low dynamic intelligence, you'll kill the cat. With high dynamic intelligence, you'll slam the brakes on. And with higher dynamic intelligence, you'll see there's a car coming towards you, so you'll swerve the other way. Your in the moment attention switches. And if you're not capable of that, you'll crash. And if you are capable of that, you'll. Now, I can't tell you if you are doing it consciously, because it happens so fast, but then you've got the adrenaline, which slows time down, and, pumping through your brain, and you've got the other, endorphins slowing time down for you in your brain. So I have an answer for your question, John, in my thesis, but I'll be buggered if I can remember it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Idea.
I don't know if Christopher there, because he's asked a couple of questions in chat. Do you want to unmute and then ask those, Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, I think Darren picked up some of them. Thanks, Darren. I always love your enthusiasm and passion for what you do. It's just so infectious.
Thank you, sir.
I was curious. One of my early questions was followed up actually by Phil asking about clarity on the 4 pillars, which was helpful. But you focused on the quotient around awareness. It caught my attention, and I wondered if the other 4 pillars had their own quotients, and if that might synthesize to a meta quotient. That's what I was interested in.
That's a great question, because I call it I prefer to call it the thinking quotient, because it is kind of, and as much there's no reason to have stages. And Phil asked this, and I didn't actually finish the point because I ramble on, but I created something called the developmental onion. And what that means is, where somebody only does internal, you focus on external, it becomes like a bulbous, when you blow up a tire and it goes too big, you'll focus on the external in that moment. And then when you've mastered external, it becomes a ring on your developmental onion. Then later on, when you want it again, you don't have to relearn it. You just have to revisit it. And it's on the, another ring on your onion, shall we say. But I like your question, but it's not really, there isn't a quotient for each pillar, in the sense that awareness quotient is a measure of all of it. It's the awareness quotient is really the score for your dynamic intelligence, if you want me to say it. And the developmental onion, which I have a visual of, is essentially a visual process of dynamic intelligence, because it's how we pull all these things in the moment. What are we focusing on? What are we good at? What are we not good at in our thinking, using these shortcuts?
So I get a sense that it's more of a swelling or pulsation and expansion.
I can show you. I've actually got it here. If I could share the screen, but it depends on whether you want to see it.
Oh, I'd love to see something, but it was the second question, which links to this, is you kind of topped out at AQ10, and I was wondering if you think that's where the species stops, or what do you think? I'm curious about what are the attributes of AQ10, and you've spoken a bit about how it compares to the other theoretical constructs that are out there. But I was just curious about your view on what have you discovered, because you'll see a lot as you're doing this, and does our species stop at AQ10?
Our species stops about AQ6, but I'm being mean, but it's almost true. Right. AQ10, as I said, is it's a destination. It's not a destination; it's a journey. And I don't think. Now, I had a chat with a guy called Michael Commons, who created a load of developmental stuff in the 80s. And he said, Darren, do you know how I know there isn't a level 17? I said, why is that? He said, because I'm at 16. And I thought that was great. Now, if I do my own test, I'm not 10. I'm about 8 and a bit. And I'm not even 9. You know what I mean? On my own scale. I don't think anybody is 9 or 10. I can show you all of the things you need to know about the frail. I've got it all. You know, I can demonstrate, I can show you the actual profile at those levels. But to be honest with you, somebody who is that in control of how they think, are they going to be capable of holding a conversation with you? You know, I mean, I'm pretty much aware as much as I can be in the moment at all times. I have to be, it's my theory. Okay. But that doesn't mean I don't get it wrong sometimes, which means I'm not AQ 9. It means I'm still in the 8s, you know. Does it stop at 10? I'm not good enough to know is the answer. If it gets to, you know, if it goes to 11, I'm not good enough to know. Maybe it goes higher. Maybe you could do it, Christopher.
I'm not even thinking that.
Yeah. So no, basically, yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for the discussion at the end, and thank you very much for Darren for the presentation. Absolutely brilliant. So and you know, where can people get in touch with you, Darren, if they've got any further questions?
My email address, I can stick my email address in here, but every single one of my social medias is at Dr. Darren Stevens, all of them. So it's, you know, Instagram, TikTok, and all those other words that I don't understand.
Brilliant.
LinkedIn.
So yeah, fascinating model. Thank you very much for going through it with everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you very much for the engaging discussion at the end. So we'll be, as we mentioned, this session's being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube in due course as well. So please do subscribe and like our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone.